Maybe it's time to start. Shall we start, Theo?
Yes, it's fine. Thank you.
Good. Well, welcome everyone to this meeting. I forget which number it is, but anyhow, we're meeting today, as it were, in Armenia. We haven't been to Armenia before, and it's a great pleasure to have my colleague Theo van Lint, who is professor of Gulbenkian, professor of Armenian studies in Oxford University, and he's been here since 2002, I think, isn't it?
Yes.
And he's a fellow of Pembroke College. And before coming to Oxford, he was based mainly in the Netherlands, but also in Munster for a while. And he started off not in Armenian, but in Slavic languages, and then got enticed to Armenian. I don't know if it was yours, Sweitenberg, who did that, but he did his doctorate under Sweitenberg on a medieval Armenian poet, and it's in Armenian poetry that he has a particular interest and has written along. A couple of years ago, in fact, I'm not sure how many years ago, but very recently, he was a co-curator of a fascinating exhibition in the Bodleian Library entitled Armenia, Masterpieces for Enduring Culture, which I think was to commemorate the 100th anniversary of the genocide, wasn't it? So that would have been 2015, so that provides a date. But Professor van Lint's going to introduce us today to one of the masterpieces of medieval Armenian literature, the Lamentations of Gregory of Narek, a very famous text. I've got several translation editions of it, and I'm sure there are many others which I don't know about, but I think hand over to you to introduce this wonderful, amazing author. It's quite puzzling too.
Thank you very much, Sebastian, for this kind introduction. I hope that everyone can hear me and that we can make this journey to Armenia a universal one. I think that would be what the saint, as I usually call him, Saint Gregory of Narek would desire for all of us. We are talking about we're going to talk and hear from a doctor of the Universal Church, which he was proclaimed on the 12th of April 2015 by Pope Francis. And the works of Saint Gregory of Narek or Saint Gregory of Narek are beginning to become a bit better known, thanks to that, I think. And this is something to be grateful for, as his works are gems of spiritual literature that may be of great support in the life of Christians on their way to eventual union with God. And this is precisely what Gregor hopes his works would be, instruments in the lives of the faithful. He applies his formidable poetic talent and his deep spirituality to help achieve this. Who was he? He was the youngest of three sons of a noble family. His father was Khosrov of Anzevatsi in Armenian, an area south of Lake Van in the Armenian kingdom of Vaspurakan in the 10th century, now in Turkey. He was born around 945 and died in 1003. His mother died when he was a young boy, and his father, Khosrov, then was consecrated bishop of Anzev. And he authored already before that, at least one of his two most well-known works, a commentary on the liturgy and an exposition of the daily office, which Gregor both knew and had in his possession in a copy by his older brother, who remained with his father as his secretary. He himself and his brother Hofhannes, John, joined the monastery when they were children, and eventually Hofhannes would become the abbot. And Grigor remained there all of his life. The monastery I'm talking about is the monastery of Narek, Narek Avank in Armenian, which had been founded or refounded, that is something scholarship is divided about, in 935 by Anania, who was the cousin of his deceased mother, and who was a learned a spiritual man in his own right. Grigor stayed in the monastery all of his life, and for a while he lived in a cave that we still know the location of as a hermit. It is not entirely clear how long he did that or in what phase of his life this took place. Anania Narekatsi, his abbot and family member, was an important teacher and author, in whom Gregory had, after his father, a second example. And quoting Abraham Teryan, Anania's works comprise exhortative discourse on the priesthood, on humility and transience in verse, the careful administration of the sacraments, treatises on penitence with tears in prosaic verse, and on morals in an ascetic life, theological essays and a panegyric in praise of the universal church, defined in fragmentary denunciation of the heretical agitators of the time, the Tondrakians, who Grigor has to fight as well. What are the works that he himself, his life we cannot say very much about, at least his external life, his interior life was as rich as one could imagine. But what are the works he has left us? From an early age onward, his erudition and saintly life were acknowledged, and he was asked in 977, so when he was perhaps in his early 30s, by the king of Vaspurakan, Gurgen Artsruni, to write a commentary on the Song of Songs. An English translation of that was published by Roberta Irvin in 2007 in Kalamazoo in the Cistercian study series. I'll show a few books covers. Perhaps they will entice reading if it were necessary. A second work is a partial commentary on Job, which is possibly by him, on Job 38, verse 2 to 39, verse 30, entitled "Who is that?" as the opening quotation, "Who is it that?" And to which a large study has recently been devoted by Arushak Tamrazian, a scholar of medieval Armenian literature, published in 2019, not translated into English. He is famous, Grigor is famous for his odes and litanies, which have been translated in their entirety by Abraham Teryan as the festal works of Saint Gregory of Narek, published by Liturgical Press in 2016 in Collegeville, with a rich introduction. He has also authored various encomia or panegyrics, also related to festal occasions in the Christian calendar, and likewise available in English in the volume I just showed. And these are, I will give you the titles: A History of the Cross of Apparance, which relates the translation of a piece of the True Cross, which was a gift from the emperors Basil and Constantine from one Armenian monastery to another in Grigor's lifetime. Further, the accompanying encomium on the Holy Cross and an encomium on the Holy Virgin, which has been studied by Tamar Dasnepetian in French translation and commentary, which sheds a lot of light on it. And further, and these works were commissioned by Bishop Stepanos of Mok, in the area neighboring where Grigor lived. Further, an encomium on the Holy Apostles, and an encomium on St. James of Nisibis, who was the patron saint of the region of Rishtumik, where the monastery is located south of Lake Van. And then he has various other works of an admonitory character, a letter to the admirable and prominent congregation of Kachaf regarding the Tondrakian heresy again. He had been from those quarters warned that he might be in danger of being one, and he exchanged this letter with them, warning them that there might be Tondrakians among themselves. Further, a brief word of counsel on Orthodox faith and pure and virtuous life, which is a rather long work. Then several works are attributed to him. An order and rules of prayer, which has recently been studied by Jean-Pierre Mahé in the Revue des Études Arméniennes, the latest volume 40 last year, which is an original work by Grigor, but through its rich reception, much interpolated and revised. A monastery in the area took it as one of its rules for prayer, and we know that it was used as such in the 14th century, so several hundred years after it was written. And the results of this rich consultation and living with it are reflected in the text we have today. And then there are several minor works where it is not clear whether he really is the author or not. And then, of course, there is the work that is the subject of today's reading. The works by Grigor and by his father Khosrov and Abbot Anania were put together under the heading The School of Narek by the regretted great scholar of Narekatsi, Hracha Tamrazian, the former director of the Maarten in Yerevan, the Institute of Ancient Manuscripts. And under his general editorship, the works of these three authors appeared in volumes 10 and 12 for those who are interested in it, of the Matenagir Hayot series, that is a series of classical Armenian authors, published on an initiative of the Calouste Gulbenkian Foundation, the Catholicosate of Cilicia in Antillas in Lebanon, and the aforementioned Maarten Institute of Ancient Manuscripts in Yerevan. And this series puts Armenian literature together in a way that Abraham Teryan mentions a sort of Armenian patrologia patrum, a really very useful series of works. Then a few words on the Book of Lamentation, the Matyan Wochberg Kutyan, as it's come to know. This is a collection of 95 ban, words or discourses, but in fact prayers, arrived in final form shortly before Grigor died in 1002. He died a year after that. And it's probably the work of his mature years. People have had many ideas about this, but one of the continuities one sees in Grigor's work is through the minor works which do not carry a colophon, attributing them to Grigor, where we see the germs of some of the themes of the later work, the Matyan Wochberg Kutyan, and some of these attributed works are among those. So these prayers are, as it is said in every caption at the start of it, they speak with God from the depths of the heart. And they are transmitted in poetic and rhythmic prose, with the exception of some parts that are indicated by the author as monorhyming poetry. And they have been regarded as poetry as a whole from the second half of the 20th century only. For instance, the critical editions that one is most likely to encounter by the Soviet edition of 1985 by Boros Khachatryan and Ashalush Razinyan have divided the lines which we find in continuous prose in the manuscripts into poetic form. And Teryan's translation of last year, from which I will read, mostly keeps to prose. And the debate about this aspect of the work is not over yet. I myself wonder if the stark visual difference between lineated print, thereby formally presenting the work as poetry, and the prose of the earlier manuscripts and earlier prints is not overestimated. We know that there were particular ways of reciting the Narek, as the literary scholar Manouk Aberian, who received his education in a seminary in the late 19th century, writes. He says that one would swing rhythmically forward and backward in cadences, the length of which were defined by both meaning and rhythm. And there's clearly a way of breathing in and breathing out while reciting this. So I think there's a different dimension to the whole debate about whether it's this prose or poetry. So perhaps the work must be allowed to be, in that respect, sui generis, although probably not unique in this respect. Neither is the overall structure of the work undisputed. Jean-Pierre Mahe, one of the great Armenologists alive, who together with his wife Annie published a French translation with study in 2000 in the CSCO series, a fantastic work. He discerns an architectural structure resembling that of a church, with prayers 1 to 33 taking place in the Gavit or narthex, the place for catechumens and penitents. And then prayers 34 to 74 would take place in the nave, where the baptized faithful gather to receive communion and to profess the creed. Prayer 34 takes the form of an elaboration of the creed. From prayer 75, a meditation on the church, one would then be in the sanctuary or tabernacle. As Michael Papazian, the author of a very instructive study of Narek, and here I have another product of Collegeville, Minnesota Liturgical Press, The Doctor of Mercy. As you can see, together with the festal works of Narek and the book we are talking about today, From the Depths of the Heart, Maarten Wolperkutian, this forms a trilogy of studies of the works and the works themselves of Narek, which is readily available, not too expensive. I'm, by the way, not hired by the press to divulge this information, but I'm very glad that it is available in this way in a great translation by Abraham Theo. So the architectural structure then, as Papazian says, the church is not only a visible edifice, but also a spiritual temple that bridges heaven and earth. He, grosso modo, accepts the progression to the church as the fundamental direction the book presents in Mahe's idea. It would then end in the consummate conversation with God in silence. The latter seems undisputed to me, but I'm not at all sure about such a linear progression of the book. Abraham Terjan makes a short shrift of it in his contribution to the Wiley Blackwell Companion to Patristics, which perhaps you have encountered. This chapter, I mean. Archbishop Boros Levon Zekian, another prominent scholar of Narek, is not convinced either. In one of his many contributions on the saints, Terjan discerns first the comprehensive biblical foundation of the Narek, and further the presence in his thought of Philo of Alexandria, talking about some of his sources and inspirations, the Cappadocian Fathers, Dionysius the Areopagite, next to other Greek and Syriac fathers, as well as Armenian theologians. To very briefly talk a little bit about the fundamentals of his belief. I think one with Terjan, whom I'm paraphrasing here, an article he published in one of the volumes on Narek as conference proceedings. The first is the image of God in mankind is a fundamental one. And an example from prayer 76 shows us Grigor's spirituality, which is both personal and Christocentric. He says, Lord Christ, blessed in heaven, who is the breath on our face and the power of our comeliness. And this comeliness is then precisely the image of God in us created beings. And in prayer 93, devoted to the Holy Chrism, Neuron, Grigor says, Lord Christ, breath of our face, your name is truly anointed. Thus out of your benevolence, you breathed in our face the breath of life along with your light. And so much about that aspect. And then a second basic, second fundamental is the fallen state of humanity. And more than 100 times he gives analogies to indicate his sinfulness in the Narek. He takes himself as the persona of humanity, and so whenever he speaks about himself, he speaks about humanity as a whole, both in sinfulness and in recipients of mercy. A somewhat longer quotation from prayer 86 may illustrate the fallen state of humanity as Grigor sees it. But we deviated from this covenantal statute and strayed like animals, stooping low and being bound to earth, in some instances by disease, in others by cruelty, and in some by gluttony and desire for fancy foods, as if a beast has long inhabited our nature. Sometimes one of the four primary elements lunges forward abruptly and in uncontrollable speed, acting savagely. And though warmed by the fervor of our love for you, and by the token of your spark which is in us, the coldness that is its counterpart extinguishes it, hampering the good. And although we ascend to you with the airy ways of angels, the weight and density of our primary element, earth, hinders us by pulling us down. End of quotation. All these quotations are in the translation of Abraham Terjal from the book I showed. Nevertheless, the divine element in each human being makes them desire to be united with God, this spark that he mentions. Then the third pillar, one might say, is the restoration of the image of God in the human being through redemption. The desire for God is answered by God through the redemption in Christ. And God is able to blow his spirit into humans again, just as happened at our creation. The aim of the incarnation was the renewal of the image of God in mankind. And prayer 19 gives a good example of this, illustrates this principle very well. Grigor there says, light unto all, in all things merciful, mighty, heavenly, restore with your divine miracle-working power my disintegrating and crumbling earthen vessel, I pray you, compassionate one. In the crucible, with the spark of your word, forge anew your image worn out in sin, I plead with you. Cleanse for your dwelling the shaky structure of my body, the buffer of my soul, a tabernacle for your repose, I pray you, benefactor. And in the same prayer he says, Lord Jesus, who for our sake alone became embodied in flesh like unto us, so that you make us like unto you for your sake. Redemption so becomes equal to deification or theosis, or as Terjan states, Christification or Christification, and emphasizes that this is in harmony with the church fathers. Terjan emphasizes this, who see redemption as deification or Christification, made possible by the mystery of the incarnation, the hypostatic union of the creator with creation. And then the fourth element of Grigor's theology is the mystical union as restoration of God's image in mankind. Mystical contemplation is a characteristic of Grigor's penitential prayers, and the realization of his desire for union is stated at various places in the Narek, as it is here in the quotation I give from prayer 75. Although at times I was severed, drawn away from paradise by subversive heresies, pulled by the hook of the deceiver's most insidious deceptions, now with this soliloquy in orthodox purity, this testimony truly of grace, I rise up again in flight on the wings of light, arriving in heaven herewith. And the journey upward starts with spiritual rebirth in the baptismal font, the sacred womb of the church, which is the embodiment of Mary. After baptism comes communion through the Eucharist. So both baptism and Eucharist are absolutely essential elements of his mystical theology. The church is thus the place for mystical contemplation, the gate of heaven. And in prayer 92, devoted to the Simandron, he writes, "May you lead me in the steps of the saints across this bridge of yearning, which neither hinders nor causes straying on the upward journey upon this heaven-bound ladder, to present me to your blessed Father of astounding name, O benefactor. May I be guided by your Spirit to be united to you inseparably." And with this, I would like to commence the reading of the first three prayers of the Narek. My copy ready of Carjan's book, and I hope that if my voice starts to falter, Sebastian, that you will clamor and ask me to speak up. This is what sometimes happens when I speak in a room with people present. So I don't know how it works over Zoom, but I'll do my best to be loud and clear so that Gregor can speak. Prayer 1. Speaking with God from the depths of the heart. Audible sighs with plaintive cries from the heart I offer to you, seer of secrets. These I present, having placed them on the fire of my afflicted soul, fruit of the smoldered yearnings of my wavering mind, sent to you through the censer of my will. May you, compassionate one, savor their scent. May you consider them with favor, over and above that of sacrifices of assorted fruit offered with thick smoke. Accept these linked words in wanting segments. May you be pleased with them and not angered, for they rise from the depths of the mysterious chamber of my feelings. To reach you speedily, a free will offering, this verbal sacrifice burned whole with the thin fat of my ability, the only richness I possess. And with pleading I lay it down for your consideration, mighty one. May it not seem to you like that of the wicked in Israel, which with arms outstretched, whom Isaiah denounced, along with the iniquity of Babylon, nor repugnant like the illustration used in the 72nd Psalm. Rather, may it be acceptable in accordance with your will, like the pleasing fragrance of the incense at the altar in Shiloh, which David restored for the resting of the ark returned from captivity, a metaphor for my lost soul being found again. Because your fearsome voice of recompense at the judgment echoes mightily in the valley of retribution, I am doubly fearful, as if rising for battle. The predictable and conflicting emotions manifested within me are already at work. Crowds of turmoil rise against one another, sword against armor, floods of thoughts, evil against good. They drag me captive to death as in former times, before the time of grace reached me, the redemption by Christ, which Paul, chosen among the apostles, shows to be superior compared to the law of Moses. For as the scripture says, the day of the Lord is near, and in the narrow pass of the valley of Jehoshaphat and down the brook of Kidron, the trial sessions of the past seem small to me in what they foreshadow regarding that with consequences for eternal life and the things to come. Once more, in a lasting way, God's kingdom has confronted me tangibly, charging me on truthful grounds with compound wrongs graver than those that brought about what was inflicted upon the Edomites and the Philistines and other foreign nations. Whereas their sentence was measured in years, the penalty for my sins is beyond measure, endless. Fear, dungeon, and inescapable upheaval, as the prophet and the speaker in Proverbs warned, have arrived at my doorway, greatly disquieting, already projecting my eternal disgrace. Only you can miraculously make the medicinal outcome amenable to life for souls utterly perplexed by doubt, O reconciler of all, exalted in ineffable glory in the boundless heights forever and ever. Amen. And then we proceed to prayer 2. Another of the repeated supplications with sighing by the same keeper of the vigil, speaking with God from the depths of the heart. And now, since you are calling with articulate lips on God Most High, who is drawn to deeds alone and is not swayed by creative words, you, my sinful soul, with a heart always inclined towards Egypt, to what similar or analogous thing shall I compare you? I am punished along with Sodom's destruction, have charges brought against me by Nineveh's prosecutors, am more timorous and barbarous than the queen of the south, more despicable than Canaan, more obstinate than Amalek, incurable as the city of idols, a remnant from the rebellion of ancient Israel, a reminder of the broken covenant of Judah, more reproved than Tyre, more shunned than Sidon, more depraved than Galilee, more unpardonable than faithless Capernaum, deplored like Chorazin, slandered with Bethsaida, shameless like Ephraim is great, a dove always known for feeble-mindedness instead of peace, a dreadful serpent hatched among lions' cubs, like cobra's eggs filled with rot. I am an image of Jerusalem after the last calamity, as in the saying of the Lord and the oracles of the seers, a rejected tabernacle about to be destroyed, a stronghold with broken gates, myself a doubly filthy creature who, though capable of speech, having relinquished my rightful inheritance, having turned my back to the house built by God, as Moses, David, and Jeremiah wrote early on, a rational edifice infected with leprosy, chastened by itching stimulated by the law, smeared with the mildly soothing clay, still unable to find a cure, torn apart yet again by the Creator's hand, thrown out into an unclean place, this my just reward by order of the Almighty, rejected, driven a great distance away, spared by none, having buried my coin in the ground of wickedness, as did the one denounced for wasting his trust, pointed out in the Gospel. But you, God, God of souls and all flesh, as professed by one divinely graced, you are forbearing and abounding in mercy, in accordance with the plea of the saintly Jonah. Grant that I complete to your delight, by your holy will, this prayer book of lamentation now begun. And having sown these words tearfully and set forth on this path towards the dwellings you have prepared, may I arrive joyfully in the time of harvest with the return of the bounty of atonement, with the blessed fruit of the goodly sheaves. O most compassionate Lord, do not give me a barren heart like the childless womb that was Israel's, and eyes like dry breasts, but hear me, a rational supplicant, O mighty and merciful one, who were before the heavens, and the heavens before the earth, and that before Jezreel's wheat, wine, and oil. May the pleadings of the heavenly ones who are with you have their influence upon my soul more than upon perishable elements. You are the Creator, and I am the clay. At the start of these prayers with sighs, may I be strengthened by your kind will even here, so that I, a waverer, might not be found unfit to enjoy the edification by your light when the heavens open, that I might not be consumed like the substance of a candle and be snuffed out. As a narrator cries out in prayer, O breath for the ill-treated person, give strength to the faint-hearted like me, and life to one worn out by a bothered conscience. Relieve my anguish, for I seek you earnestly. Receive these repeated supplications and grant the mercy of your grace. Accept this trifle from a weakling like myself and provide a major portion yourself, Almighty. Strengthen my words of contrition, having sent us the Spirit from on high with messages imbued with the breath of God, to rest upon these things set forth. Grant, benevolent Lord, that we might be enlightened in the truth like Isaiah. Bestow upon me, although I am deserving of death, the gold of grace instead of the brass of an ignoble sound, instead of the blackness of unadorned iron, the gloss of bronze burnished in Lebanon, symbolic of virtue. Why have you hardened the heart of my deplorable being to not fear you, who are ineffable and astounding? Let not my negligible labor be fruitless like that of the planter vainly sowing the barren ground. Let me not be in labor without giving birth, lament without shedding tears, meditate without sighing, cloud over without raining, proceed without arriving, call on you without being heard, implore continuously without being heeded, groan without being pitied, beg without ever being helped, become a sacrificial offering yet without being consumed by fire, see you without being rewarded. Hear me before I cry out to you, who alone are almighty. Do not hand me over to eternal suffering, punished as I am. Do not recompense me for my tallied days of sin, evildoer that I am. Grant me life, compassionate one. Hear me, merciful one. Show favor, forgiving one. Save, forbearing one. Defend, protector. Be benevolent, mighty one. Deliver, omnipotent one. Revive, restorer. Raise up again, astounding one. Enlighten, heavenly one. Heal, resourceful one. Grant pardon, inscrutable one. Reward with gifts, generous one. Adorn with grace, affable one. Reconcile, immaculate one. Accept, charitable one. Wipe away transgressions, blessed one. Thus, on that agonizing day, when I stare at the abyss on either side, I may also catch sight of your salvation, my hope and guardian. When I lift up my eyes to look at the most confounding, frightening path, may your angel of peace meet me kindly. Show me, Lord, on the day of my breath's departure, that pure spirit ascending with light to the happy ones in heaven, arriving there with gifts of your love. May you appoint me to the company of the departed righteous. May you grant me an unexpected kindness on the day of despair, evil though I am. Far be it from you, lauded one, who are the salvation of all, to designate a cruel beast as a traveling companion to lead me, your sick sheep, now dead in sin. Rather grant incorrupt life, salvation to me, who am devastated by transgressions. Will you, my expectation, possibly forget your being benevolent? Will you, caring one, neglect your being compassionate? Will you, immutable one, alter your love for humankind? Will you, everlasting one, withdraw your life-giving? Will you abandon the pleasant fruit of your mercy? Will you mar the gracious flower of your kindness? Will you dishonor the stately substance of your bounty? Will you change the glory of your resplendent white hair? Will you discard the fittingly pleasant splendor of your crown? Since the merciful are blessed, then you, kingdom unto yourself, are full of blessedness. Will you not grant me full salvation? Will you not offer a remedy for my wounds? Will you not have a salve for my injuries? Will you not provide a cure for my frailty? Will you not let light shine in darkness for me who trusts in your strength? You, gift of life to the universe, you alone have glory of your own, truly and everlasting existence, attested ever since there was nothing. O blessed and glorified Trinity, eternally and beyond the limits of all conceivable infinities. Amen. I have also given the third prayer, but that is the longest of the ones, and I don't know whether there's time for it, Sebastian. It's up to you.
Yes, maybe that would not allow for any questions.
Indeed.
So it's there for people to read, which is a wonderful resource.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you very much. Do you want to add some comments before we open up to questions?
I think I would like just to say that although these opening prayers set out very clearly what he wants to do with the book and through the book, I do myself not really believe that we have a linear progression in the Narek from beginning to end, but see it more as a circular falling and getting up again with deeper appreciation perhaps of God's mercy as one goes along. That is. I must say I'm not a theologian. I'm just a user of this book, and I try to use it also by translating it into my native Dutch. And that in itself is a very rewarding experience, difficult as I find it. But that's all I would like to say after this.
Well, thank you very much. That's a wonderful experience. Now, anyone who has questions, either put a hand up or do it through chat, and I'll try and keep an eye open. On my screen, if you look at reactions, you'll be able to see how to put a hand up. So, oh, I've lost everything. How awful! What's happened? Yes.
We can
Reappeared.
Yeah.
Reappeared. Dangerous to touch anything. Well, perhaps I'll start off with the question. And it seems to me that this is a quite remarkable genre, and I can't think, certainly not in Syriac, anything like it. But anything that I can think of are the centuries that you have by Zagreus and others, but these are very short, pithy things, which is rather like Buddhist koans. You have to puzzle them out. But this is, as it were, an expansion, I suppose, of it. But it's interesting that he goes to 95, which I think is what Isaac does, if I remember rightly, in one of the centuries, but I can't quite remember offhand. But are there precedents for this genre in Armenian?
Not so strongly. He knew Evagrius and his mysticism of tearful repentance ultimately goes back to that. One generally assumes. It is Anania who has similar things, but perhaps not as wonderfully formulated as Grigor has. Yeah, so it's a contribution of the school of Narek. Yeah, as far as I know. Yeah.
Is another thing that puzzles me? As you know, there are a whole lot of prayers attributed to Ephraim in Armenian, and these are very similar in style. And they're long, well, rhetorical in some ways, but do you think they're imitating Gregory?
That's a very interesting question I'd never thought of. Maybe some of them are, I think, dated to the 12th century, if I'm not mistaken. So. Yes. Logically, it's possible, and in the 12th century also the reception of the Narek becomes clearly visible when we have the oldest manuscript by copied for Nerses Lambron Atsi, Nerses of Lambron, and yeah. So yes, that might be an inspiration. Yeah.
Yes, thank you. I see Father Andrew.
I agree with you there as a parallel, and it's not known that they might have had contact or so.
No.
But yes, it is rather striking. And, yeah.
More questions, comments? And it always strikes me that these writers knew the biblical text fantastically well.
Oh, yeah.
And yet probably they heard it only or largely through readings in the liturgy. I suppose the existence of commentaries indicates that they must have also read, as it were, from beginning to end. This being a nuisance. Flying cat.
Yes, they're wonderful. Yeah. There's a hand. There are two hands I see.
Oh, yeah. Yes. Theo, can you?
And it's fascinating. It's always. I think the research hasn't dared yet to get there. One has to tread very carefully. But yes, there are whole enumerations which at the beginning of the third prayer, we have all these all the things that God is not, and it has been that has been compared to the 99 names of Allah, for instance, there certainly was awareness of Arabic culture and maybe spiritual culture as well. Armenia had been under Arabic suzerainty for several centuries and had just been a century, if you want, liberated from it. But there were Arab Emirates around it, and we have other types of literature where there's a very vivid presence of narrating that reminds one of Arabic literature as well. So there's still scope for research in that area, and one has never really mooted the idea that it may function sometimes as a tool to ward off conversion. This becomes an item a few centuries later, where one in cities like Yersinka, Erzincan, where competing Christian and Sufi brotherhoods work on a template of Persianate literature, and one cannot certainly compare that with the Lake Van area in this time, but it is very interesting that you hear this resonate, and Grigor certainly had a fine ear for that sort of thing, I would think. So yeah, it's always the question: is there a tradition, an indigenous or Christian tradition that justifies exclusion of such a connection, or is there not? But I think the flexibility of Grigor, if you see how he sometimes addresses the believers in simple classical Armenian, and at other times, depending on the genre, goes into the highest registers of rhetoric. And I think he may very well be aware of this. Of course, the question then is, do we have itinerant Islamic faithful who knock on the door of the monastery of Narek, or where would they meet one another? But yeah. So
I didn't realize that's you mentioned that before.
In some of the poems it does. He has some examples taking again from a culture that the church definitely does not endorse, namely the wailing, that of the wailing women at funerals. Mm-hmm. And they have a particular name for that. A kots is a wailing song, and that rhymes in ui. And he has several. He announces that he's going to use them, and then has a lament in that sense as well. So yes, he clearly plays with these things.
Thank you.
You should mention those. Yeah.
The form, whether prose or poetry, and in Syriac, the things which are really in between, and the equivalent almost of Greek Kunstprosa. And it strikes me that this really belongs to that intermediary genre, which sometimes slips into poetry every now and then, but otherwise is basically rhythmic prose.
Yes, sorry, I don't want to interrupt you. Yeah.
No, I not being an omnologist, I have no idea whether that's valid or not.
No, I think it certainly is valid. You have these typical rhetorical instruments, the repetition of the same opening consonant of a word in 3, 4, 5 words, and the same cadences. Yeah, there have been various attempts at defining what the meter might be, and whether there is a meter, so to say. And the attempt was to look at elements of perhaps 5 syllables as an organizing principle, but it doesn't really work. It doesn't really work. Yeah, and I think we're sort of flogging. Well, you shouldn't flog horses anyway, perhaps, but flogging the wrong horse here. I think you're much more right in setting such an intermediate form, and whether poetry or prose did not really matter. And if it becomes poetry, then it is characterized by the end rhyme he uses rather than something else, and perhaps also by in that case the more musical element or accompaniment even, which I would imagine perhaps the wailing women had, although their wailing would be very musical itself.
I see Anthony Marnie. Can you
Well, I'm not aware of Catholics who are not also of the Armenian rite. Of course, they are the bridge, and it's certainly been someone like now Archbishop Zekian who promoted this together, I must say, with Monsignor Claudio Guccirotti, who's an important voice in this as well. And so he's an example of that. You would know this better than I do, Anthony. And I haven't seen it in parishes yet, but or in reading groups or so. I'm not aware of that. It's not a circle I am in myself, but I think it would be a good first. It's a good, fantastic first step. This and it also is a wonderful way of bridging the sometimes exaggerated difference between a so-called Miaphysite and a Chalcedonian acceptance of faith.
Fascinating and most illuminating, and we've got the third prayer to read for ourselves, so that's as it were a bonus. So thank you very much. Thank everyone for coming, and thank you to all the questioners. Theo, do you have in your mind exactly when the July meeting is? Because I have forgotten. I forgot to note it down. The July meeting. Do you know? Do you remember who it is?
Yes. Yes. On the 25th of July, we welcome Dr. Erika Hunter. She will read about commemorating the saints of Turfan.
Wonderful. So that's very good. So we move right across Asia for next week. So thank you so much, everyone. Thank you, especially Theo.
Thank you, Sebastian. Thank you, Theo. And thank you, everyone, for being present and asking.
Well, goodbye.
Goodbye.